Good evening and welcome to Full Chat. I lied last week when I said we wouldn't be back because I ended up not going to France. I am in the UK, I'm sat in my sim room and we're going to do a normal full chat. And we've got some things to talk about. The first thing we're going to chat about is Lewis Hamilton getting his Brazilian citizenship, his honorary Brazilian citizenship, and what we think about that. We're also going to talk about Helmut Marko's comments where he said that 6 teams will be over the 2022 budget cap. We've got some more Red Bull news. Sky Sports boss went down, or is planning to go down, to have a bit of a chat with the guys at Milton Keynes to make sure they're not feeling too sad about Sky's coverage. We've got some more Helmut Marko news. There's a lot of Red Bull heavy coverage tonight. We've got Marko's comments that Max is unbeatable and his teammates just have to live with that, and that's not a cruel thing to say. We're going to discuss that article. But first, we need to talk about, did Alex Van Gien win the football? So I need to introduce Alex Van Gien. Here he is, my co-host Alex. How was your evening?
Good evening. Yes, I have literally rolled in from football about 15 minutes ago. I was on the winning team yet again. 2 goals this week, but I played rubbish because I was full of really, really nice food still left over from last week, from my week away for work, where I did nothing but eat heavy, stodgy food and beer.
Okay, so you did win the football, but you didn't score 9 goals like last time.
Scored 2.
That's still pretty good for a man of your age.
They were good ones.
So what Alex doesn't know, because Alex can't actually see the stream in live. He's looking at me through a webcam, so he doesn't know that I had a special little icon that was some old people playing football. I resisted the temptation to find pictures of 2 very fat people playing football, so I went for old instead.
I love you too, mate.
So this week in Formula One was basically the build up to Brazil. So we had a couple of weeks off, and we're basically just building towards. We saw the Las Vegas kind of launch party where there were some Formula One cars.
Overestimation, more like it.
Yes, varying ages of Formula One cars doing donuts and that kind of thing on the Las Vegas Strip. And then the drivers kind of headed down to Brazil, and Hamilton's been doing some fun things. I'll tell you what then, let's actually talk about that Las Vegas thing before we get into our predetermined topics. We've already got some comments there in the YouTube chat that you look sweaty, Alex, and that's understandable.
I've wiped most of it off, but I just have a shiny head as well, so
Alex
wet.
raced back for us, guys. So, and I should obviously just remind everyone who's in the Twitter space that, as usual, we're running a Twitter space, but the real action is on the YouTube channel. So click on the link in the latest tweet that I've tweeted on my Twitter profile if you'd like to see us in our full colour glory. So we had this Las Vegas launch. It was kind of an excuse to get some footage and to build some hype ahead of next year's event. Was there any other purpose to it? They obviously went to a lot of effort to close off the streets and let cars drive through casinos. Yeah, that was definitely for footage, wasn't it? That was for kind of promo footage, that part.
I had to watch it a bunch of times to check that it wasn't fake, because they drove a V8 through a casino, and those things are really, really loud, even on idle, and no one looked like they reacted to the fact that there was a really loud Formula One car driving past. So that was a bit weird. It's all publicity. It's a real shame. I was looking at some tickets. Not that I have any desire or any design to go to Vegas, but I have lots of desire to go to Vegas. That's where I want to go for my 40th. But
not long now.
2 years, 2.5 years. There was 1.5 years. Oh God. There were tickets selling, individual tickets, like the basic tickets that I could find, for $2,500. Which is absolutely insane. So it's literally a thing for the mega rich and people who are splashing out on something. You're not going to have your normal fans there. It's going to be a very weird atmosphere, and it's going to be on a Saturday night as well, which is again also weird.
So we saw some of the track. They used the Strip, didn't they? Is that right? I don't really know Las Vegas very well, but I think the Las Vegas Strip, that famous bit, is incorporated into the track. Connor Edwards in our chat on YouTube says, have we seen what they did to the track? The first variation was boring, but they had one interesting corner, and then they ruined it. So I haven't seen. I didn't realise they changed it.
I've only seen a couple of weeks ago someone who built it in a video game and drove around it in a video game, and it looked really, really, really dull as a racetrack. It looked like, you know those kiddie kart tracks you go on with the karts that you put like 20p in, and they all look like Formula One cars that you get in it, and it's just a bit of a kidney shape. That's kind of how it looks, with a few more twisty bits on it. It just looks like a flat out. I think it literally is a festival of speed, because maybe they underestimate how much the Americans understand about the sport now, and just want them to see fast cars going fast.
So I saw probably the same computer-generated footage, like someone had built it on R Factor 2 and then driven around and recorded it. And I thought it looked just incredibly high speed and with the most ridiculously long straight. And I get the feeling that it's almost like all modern F1 tracks, they have to put in this massive straight. And I don't know about you, it feels like that means that the bias for the teams is just going to be towards super low drag, and it means the cars aren't actually going to be that good through the corners because they're going to have to sacrifice a lot of downforce to not just be sitting ducks on the huge straight. I don't know. I'll wait until we actually see it. I don't just want to poo-poo an event that we haven't seen yet, but maybe it's not the best track ever.
I can't remember if I've actually seen the full calendar for next year, but is that now Miami, Vegas, and COTA?
Yes.
Or is this instead of COTA?
No, we've got 3.
Someone told me it was instead of COTA, and I thought there's no way that's...
There might have been some talk at some point of COTA struggling for money, but I'm pretty sure with the success of this year's event, and I think they've got a contract anyway, so no, we're looking to have 3 separate US Grand Prix next year. So,
and listen, I got no issue with having three races in the States. I have issue with them being Miami and Vegas on not purpose-built race circuits that don't look very interesting. Miami race this year was pretty dull. I think the only way the Miami race is going to get spiced up at all is if they have one of their classic out-of-nowhere rainstorms that rains for 10 minutes, then stops. So I'm a bit meh on the American ones, because we could go back to Indy, because that Indy track was a good little racetrack when there was more than 6 cars on it.
So I heard Danica Patrick on is it Beyond the Grid? Is that the name of the podcast? I always forget. Today. I think it was released today. Anyway, and she was saying that you can fit around 70 UKs. She actually said England's, but I think she might have meant UK's, into the USA. So 3 races when the UK has 1 isn't too crazy, and we could have more. And I kind of take that. I take that logic, but I think 3 is probably all right for the moment, isn't it? Especially because we've got quite a big, in total, North American calendar, because we've got Canada, and we've got Mexico, and we've got Brazil. So we do have quite a few races on that side of the globe now, which is nice. There was a period where we didn't really have that many. The US was like a big gaping hole in the F1 calendar.
But unfortunately, all of those tracks have become tracks that actually aren't that interesting. Miami's not interesting. Canada has been boring the last few years, which is surprising because Canada always used to be loads and loads of fun. Mexico was drab. I think the only decent race that's been in the States has been every single race at COTA, because COTA's phenomenal, which just shows purpose-built racetracks are the way to go. You look at this season, and I remember being a bit bored in the first half of the season because so many of the races were on street circuits, and then all of a sudden we got to a proper race circuit, and these cars came alive, and the whole thing came alive, and the racing was proper. So I just want them to stop doing street tracks. I get why they do them; they're relatively cheap to put on. You're taking the racing to the people rather than trying to get the people to the racing, like the old Korean track or the old Indian track or the old Turkish track. All of those tracks were miles and miles and miles of civilization and was a nightmare to get to. So it was difficult to sell tickets for. If you stick it in the city, people are going to buy tickets.
So we've got plenty of comments in the chat there calling for a Laguna Seca Grand Prix, and I have to say I don't disagree. And that's the thing, actually. The US has plenty of great tracks, not necessarily FIA A grade or whatever it is, whatever the Formula One grade is, but they would be awesome. But I agree. We've got these kind of events, these location events. It has to be in Miami. Miami doesn't have a track, so we'll make a street track, etc. Las Vegas, obviously, there's a reason it's in the center of Las Vegas, and maybe they don't want people going up to the hills of Sonoma. Is that where Las Vegas is? Kind of north of San Francisco, that area, Northern California. Anyway, but
Sonoma's awful anyway.
I think Formula One is popular enough now that you can get people to travel out to the middle of nowhere. That's the thing. But Anyway, talking of a track which is definitely purpose-built for Formula One and isn't just a street track and is in the middle of a giant city, one that I've been fortunate enough to go to, albeit 11 years ago now.
I was talking to somebody about it the other day.
The Brazilian Grand Prix at Sao Paulo, or São Paulo, like with an N. That's kind of how they pronounce it in Brazil. Yeah, they always say São Paulo. Anyway, if anyone would like to correct my pronunciation in the chat, feel free on YouTube. So this circuit really it's kind of, you wouldn't believe it. I'm going to try and describe. So I was lucky enough to win a trip there with Red Bull, funnily enough, back in 2011. We stayed in the same hotel as the Formula One drivers. You know, I shared a lift with Fernando Alonso. I had breakfast next to Ross Brawn at the time. I was in the gym with Paul di Resta back when he was a driver. It was kind of quite a cool thing. Nico Rosberg came and hugged my girlfriend at the poolside because he was a nice guy, and I told him she was a fan. We got a photo of that. And anyway, the track is an absolute nightmare to get to. So you could pretty much see, if you looked out of our hotel window, you could see the area where the track was. You know, it was within a viewable distance, but to get there took about 4 hours. It was absolutely crazy through the city traffic. And you end up in this very heavily built up area, which you don't really see on the TV coverage unless you're in the helicam shots. And unlike somewhere like Silverstone, where you come off a dual carriageway, you go down another little road, and then there's grass and things in between the road and the entrance to the track. Sao Paulo, there's like a main road directly behind the grandstand. It's like a high street directly behind the grandstand, and you walk through a gate and you're suddenly in the track, and it's quite a crowded, kind of very, very much tucked away circuit that's surrounded by buildings. There's people stood on top of high-rise or buildings which are being built. It's kind of favelas around the lake end of the track. And it's just a very, very... It's not like any other track I've ever been to. But in terms of Formula One racing, it seems to pretty often deliver interesting events.
Well, I think Martin Brundle always says you could put this track anywhere in the world, it will always produce good racing. And I think that's because it's, well, as we discussed last week, it's at high altitude. So lots and lots of engine power and lots of and little downforce. So you're running high downforce packages. You've got long straights into chicanes, which provide overtaking. You've got a long straight into fast left-handers that switch back on each other, which again is good for overtaking. You've got a tight, twisty middle bit, which then opens up to the final corners. And it just produces some of the best racing. And that is before you even talk about the inclement weather as well. Because, what is it? Interlagos means between two lakes, doesn't it? So it's in a bit of a bowl. And they get their own little microclimate there. So you get very weird and wonderful weather. We had, before the start of the 2008 race, there was rain at the beginning and then rain at the end for all the craziness that happened in 2008. And yeah, it always shows up some really, really good racing, and the drivers love it. And you always find if you go to a track where the drivers really love it, it produces good racing.
So you mentioned high downforce packages. I heard the Mercedes debrief. I can't remember who it was that was giving this particular one. They changed the person on their YouTube channel who gives it. Might have been James Vowles. I heard that they weren't going to be running high downforce here because Mercedes typically does better this year with the high downforce package. And he was saying that this wouldn't necessarily be the case at Interlagos. I think probably because the corner, or I think we might have discussed this last week, some of the corners are just so slow that downforce isn't really in effect, and you've got that long, fast run down to turn one where you need to be going very fast, you need low drag. So actually it might be more of a medium downforce here, which might not play into Mercedes' hands too well. Do you have any predictions before we go into our predefined topics, which we've managed to avoid entirely so far? Do you have any predictions of who's going to do well here? This is probably quite an easy one.
Do you want fantastical or do you want brutally honest?
Let's go for honest.
It's going to be Max, isn't it? I think Max will win this, and as well. He's, the car's on song. He's driving it brilliantly. We've talked about this before when Lewis was dominating. It's all well and good having the best car on the grid, but you still have to drive it. You still have to make it work the way for you. And They're not making the car worse for Sergio Perez. They weren't making it worse for Valtteri Bottas or for Nico Rosberg. Just the best drivers get the best out of the best machinery. And at the moment, no matter what that machinery, what money was spent to make that wonderful machinery, Max Verstappen is just driving it brilliantly, and he's untouchable. So unfortunately, as a Lewis Hamilton fan, the money's on Max Verstappen.
Okay, so since we're talking about Max Verstappen, I'll tell you what, let's skip over a couple of our initial topics and let's go to the topic which really specifically talks about Max. So I'll try and bring up the correct little icon. Here we go. So if you're on YouTube, you'll see that we've got a picture of Helmut Marko and Max Verstappen with the headline or the title, Max is unbeatable. Now, this was from Alex. What was the publication? Hang on, I'm going to try and look on my phone without killing the Twitter space. I'm going to just gently swipe upwards. It was on.
I'm trying to look for it as well.
It was on. I'm scrolling up. Planet F1. Hopefully you can still hear me in the Twitter space. It was on Planet F1, and it was an article where effectively Helmut Marko was quoted as saying, Max is just the best. He's had plenty of teammates who, I am paraphrasing now so I don't just read you out the article, plenty of teammates who he's conquered effectively, and it's not cruel of him to tell those teammates, and so Perez at the moment, that they're just not as good as Max, and you might as well just accept it. Don't bother trying to change the setup to chase him. He is just the best, and it doesn't matter who goes up against him. Is this true? The records this year say that he's correct.
Listen, it is correct as far as Max versus majority of his teammates is concerned. He has been. You know, there's the facts are there that he's beaten. Has he been beaten by a teammate before? As in reprehensibly on pace, rather than just when he was at
Toro Rosso.
Toro Rosso, that's the one I'm looking for. When he was at Toro Rosso and they didn't score many points and that kind of stuff. I don't think he's been. Maybe
this is one our chat can help us out with. Has Max been beaten ever across a season? He hasn't had that many seasons that you could think where that might have happened. Did Sainz beat him over the season on points? Probably doubt it. And I think he probably had the better of Ricciardo as well. Although Max joined midway through the season, maybe there weren't enough races for him to catch up to Ricciardo.
He joined midway through the season and won his first race.
Well, the chat can help us out there.
So what I was getting at was the problem is if you come in and you just say, right, you're the second driver, okay, people can accept that. But to say you're not as good as this person, you're never going to beat them, what a way to absolutely destroy someone's confidence. And, you know, he might have said that to Sergio recently, and recently Sergio's been way off the pace because he's gone, well, what's the point of blooming trying? He doesn't expect me to beat Max. I'll just poodle along and see out my contract. And who wants to be in that environment? You know, they might pick up the odd win here and there if that's what they want from their career, but you're going into that team and you'll be basically being told you're not going to beat this guy. We're not going to help you beat this guy. That tells me as well. So, you're a number two, like it or lump it.
So Chris Collins and Martin Stensbol in the chat saying that Max was beaten by Ricciardo in a few races and over one season. So maybe 2016 Red Bull. But I think with the caveat that he did come in midway through. So I think
he came in midway. Daniel Ricciardo had his feet under the table. Max was new to a top team. I think it was always very, very clear from the second Max got into the sport at 17 years old that he was incredibly talented.
So I don't think anyone would argue that Max, even if the numbers say that particular season maybe he didn't come out ahead, I don't think anyone would argue that Max hasn't always had the upper hand on his teammates. So I think that on reflection of this year in particular, it's going to be super duper record year if you're right about him also winning this weekend and Abu Dhabi as well. It's going to be, you know, not just breaking the record for the most races ever won. It's going to be extremely dominant. And even in terms of percentages, I know we've got more races this year than ever before, but even if you look at a percentage of races, he's probably going to be ahead there as well. So I don't think Marko is wildly wrong in telling Max's teammates that they're just not as good as him. I just don't think it's maybe a particularly a particularly useful thing to say to a second driver. Maybe it is. Maybe it takes the pressure off them, and maybe it means that those drivers stop trying too hard, and it might help them accept it. But I don't think drivers tend to respond that well. They like to think they've got a chance of beating the guy in the other.
Tell that to Jaime Alguersuari, Jean-Eric Verne, um, what was the Russian guy called? Danny Kvyat, Pierre Gasly, anyone who stepped into a Red Bull or Alfa or Toro Rosso seat, Mark Webber, who just got told they weren't good enough and they get rid of them. I think they have the least productive up until the point they get to the top of the profession. I think they have the best young driver program, and then they dump them in the Formula One where they probably need the most support and take it all away. And I just think it's the wrong time to do it. I think if you look at Lewis when he was growing up through being backed by McLaren, he had loads of pressure on him in the junior categories to win everything. Otherwise, he would lose his seat. And I think he did for one season, and then he got it back. But then got to F1 and had all the support and everybody around him to make sure that, right, okay, we've spent the money on this kid. Let's make sure he succeeds.
So Connor Edwards, again, Connor's quite chatty in our chat, and he often has very good points. So he's not the only person in the chat. If you're listening on Twitter and you think we're only reading out particular names, Connor says, Marko isn't wrong if you take it out of context, because Max hasn't really had world-class teammates like Lewis, Fernando or Schumacher. And also it was pointed out by Toby Baker a little bit earlier that Ricciardo beat Max in 2017 in his final season at Red Bull. But I still think when you look at... and people were mentioning that the teammates, so Ricciardo in that instance, maybe have taken advantage of Max having some accidents and, nabbed a few more points over the season. But I think the writing was on the wall. Ricciardo didn't jump ship having easily been faster than Max all season. I think he saw what was coming. Whether
the writing was on the wall.
I think exactly. So
I think he said as much, didn't he? He said the team is definitely turning themselves to focus on Max.
And that does tend to happen with a driver who demonstrates themselves to be faster than the teammate. And I think it's difficult to think back that far of exactly what happened through that whole season. But Ricciardo wouldn't have left if he thought he was comfortably there and he had the beating of Max. So,
if you're a team boss or a team owner and you've got a chance of winning a title or two, do you want two drivers like Lewis Hamilton and Nico Rosberg, who are both rapid but will take wins and points and crash into each other? Or do you want a number one and a really good number two who's just going to finish behind him and pick up wins when the other one can't?
Well, I think we know the answer to that. As much as we prefer to have similar ability drivers in a team when it's at the front, we know from plenty of experience that is quite a good way to lose championships. Look at McLaren in 2007 when they had comfortably the best car. Well, actually, that is debatable. I think Ferrari had a good car at points, but McLaren had two drivers who nearly won the championship, and Ferrari didn't have two that nearly won, and McLaren still managed to lose it because they took so many points off of each other. So I think definitely Mercedes are in the wrong position currently if they want an easier route to the title, with Russell and Hamilton being so close. If their car is capable of running at the front next year, say it's equal to the Red Bull, then Max is going to score more points. Max will win. If the Red Bull and the Mercedes are equal next year, Max will win the championship because, in my opinion, Russell and Hamilton will, even if one of them has the upper hand ultimately, they're still going to take more points off each other than Perez is ever going to take off of Verstappen. So actually, I think the Red Bull and an old Ferrari philosophy is the correct one. I just don't like it very much.
No, I totally agree with you. But that's the whole thing. Next year, if Merck fix their car and they have, let's say we have 2021 levels of competitiveness between Mercedes and Red Bull, who's going to tell George Russell to move out the way for Lewis Hamilton to give him points if Lewis is leading the championship or whatever, he's hot on his heels? Who's going to tell George to get out of the way and give up a win because at the moment, George is still chasing that first win. You know, he's had a few podiums now, but he is desperate for that. He's had a pole, but he is desperate for that first win. And I don't think anyone's going to let him. Going to take it away from him. I think he'll go for multi 21 and radio not working and all that kind of stuff. But anyway, can we move topics, because we've been really nice about Max Verstappen. We don't normally do that.
We can. So I actually have a topic which isn't one of our listed ones. So let's break up the Helmut Marko Red Bull chat. We've got 2 more topics about those people. Let's break that up with the rumours. I don't know whether you call it a rumour. I saw it reported in a tweet by a reasonably trustworthy publication, I believe, about Mercedes eyeing up Charles Leclerc as a replacement for Hamilton in a couple of years, actively courting him. What do we think about that? Personally, I'll tell you me first. I really like that idea because he's one of my favourite drivers. So I would really like to see him in the good guys team, the team that I prefer over the dark side of Red Bull. So I would really like a Russell Leclerc team. Same problem as Hamilton Russell, in that they will just take points off each other. But absolutely. Mercedes have more of that philosophy, don't they?
I love Charles Leclerc. I like his attitude. I like the way he drives. He's incredibly humble. I sometimes don't like the way he's so hard on himself.
He's extremely beautiful.
he is a wonderfully handsome man, and yeah, I would love to see him in, but how does he slot in if they're thinking about him 24? Because Lewis stated at the last race, "You ain't getting rid of me yet." Mercedes aren't going to drop Lewis Hamilton unless all of a sudden Lewis's performance drops off a cliff, which it doesn't show any signs of doing. What are they going to do? They're going to replace George, the guy they have literally funded his entire career and brought to the fold and brought forward, and then all of a sudden he's got his chance, and they're going to take it away for Charles Leclerc? I don't know. I mean, unless they have a monster of a car next year, Lewis romps off to his 8th title and then disappears off the sunset, and then you sign Charles Leclerc.
And I think that might be the scenario where this is realistic. I think if Mercedes produce an absolute awesome rocket ship next year, and Hamilton manages,
just one that's capable of fighting,
and if Lewis manages to be the one that comes back and wins that championship and has that record, the last record that he's kind of waiting on, the most championships, undisputed highest number of championships, I think he would consider retiring at that point, despite what he said recently about being happy to carry on into his 40s. So that's maybe the scenario that Mercedes are looking at for Leclerc to slot in. But I do think whatever happens, Leclerc's not winning a championship at Ferrari. Ferrari built the fastest car this year for certain situations.
At the start.
Well, it's still been getting poles occasionally. Yeah, okay, it's recently.
It's fast over one lap, but that doesn't mean anything.
But that you'd normally say, if you've got a car that's the fastest over one lap and you've got a massive championship lead early on in the season and you've got drivers as good as Charles Leclerc, you should win that championship. But obviously, nothing to do with him. The car wouldn't, even if he hadn't made the mistake at France, the car hasn't been there. So he hasn't had the opportunity this year. And I kind of feel like this was the best shot Ferrari are going to have for a while. I don't see them maintaining their development like Mercedes or Red Bull probably will over the next couple of years. So I think Leclerc probably needs to go to a Mercedes or a Red Bull if he wants that championship.
We have Popcorn anytime in the chat saying Hamilton has a crap car and a crap year and everyone is writing him off. I don't think everyone is writing him off. The haters have been writing him off for years. People who just don't like Lewis Hamilton, don't like Mercedes, don't like the combination, have always written him off. So they'll give any opportunity to. I don't think we have ever written Lewis Hamilton off. I think if you write Lewis Hamilton off at your peril, and he has shown that this second half of the season, that he's been alongside Max the best driver.
What's that? Lewis Hamilton, newly decorated Brazilian citizen. So Lewis Hamilton this week, as you will have seen, unless you've been living under a rock, received an honorary Brazilian citizenship, which had been on the cards for some time. Alex finds this a little bit amusing because there was a time where he didn't seem very popular in Brazil, but more recently, probably because of his success in Brazil and mainly his public affection for Senna. He's always spoken for his entire career about how Senna was his inspiration. He's very popular with the Brazilian public and got lots of kudos for last year's performance. And he is now. He even had the flag, didn't he? He had the Brazilian flag that was given to him by, I think, a marshal after the race. And he was in the Parliament. He was somewhere very official. Received the certificate. He's now British Brazilian.
I find it really weird because in 2008, he comes over the line. He's nicked it from Felipe Massa, and they boo him. And there's that brilliant line from Anthony Hamilton when he's talking to Ted, because Ted wasn't talking to Red Bull. He's talking to Ted, and he says, "Oh, they shouldn't do this. They should be good sports people." So for now, 14, 13 years later, for them to all of a sudden be giving him citizenship is a bit strange because apart from his incredible performance last year, and obviously just being a Senna fan, to be cynical, it sounds like a bit of a publicity stunt.
So the other reason why this is interesting from the Brazilian people's point of view is Senna is obviously the big hero. Senna is the legend. But Hamilton doesn't really drive like a Senna. Senna was, okay, I was going to say ruthless, but that doesn't really cover it. Senna was willing to drive dirty. And I don't think Hamilton really has ever been someone who would deliberately take an opponent out. We're going to get people saying that Silverstone last year was a deliberate takeout.
Mostly Hamilton fans listening, don't worry about it.
I've said my piece on that, but anyway, Hamilton hasn't been the kind of driver who would do the things that Senna was willing to do to win. He seemed to always be someone that's keen to win in the right way. So it's also interesting that he's being recognised as someone who loves Senna, and the Brazilian people like him, not probably as much as they loved Senna, but they have a affection for him. But he's actually a very different driver.
Yeah, he definitely is. It's like one of the years when Ferrari was going for the championship against Merck. So what was it, 17, 18? And they were at Hungary, and Lewis thought he had a lot of pace. Says to the team, "Can you let me past Bottas?" They told him to wait. He said, "If you let me past and I don't pass them, I'll let Valtteri back." Now, there is not a chance in hell Senna, Schumacher, Max Verstappen would have done that because that's the way their mentality is. Lewis, on the last corner, pulled over, let his teammate back past him. And I think that just shows he has much more of a code of honor, I think, when driving a Formula One car compared to especially the likes of Senna, where it was all 100% passion, win at all costs.
So we're getting comments in the chat on YouTube, and if you're listening on Twitter, just remember that you can go to the YouTube channel and watch this as a video and interact in the chat and tell us what you think. We're having comments, basically examples of when Hamilton has got his elbows out and been rough with people. We've got Kota versus Rosberg, Zandvoort weave on the straight versus Russell.
I don't remember the weave.
That was pretty recently. God, you must have not been paying attention. But
no.
My point here is
there's been so many races, Brad. It's really, really difficult to remember what happens in every single one.
Basically, none of these things are him deliberately taking out an opponent.
Mm-hmm.
Senna knew, if I take Prost out, if neither of us finish, if we crash, then I'm champion. He's happy to do that. I don't think Hamilton would do that. And in fact, we could probably point to examples where he might have had an opportunity to do that. Certainly try versus Rosberg at Abu Dhabi, where he did everything in his power legally to back Rosberg up into other cars, to try and even with the team requesting him not to. Was it Paddy Lowe coming on the radio saying, "Oh, this is getting a bit silly," something like that. But he did everything legally that he could to try and affect the result. But he stopped short of brake testing. He could have brake tested Rosberg.
Absolutely.
Hoped that, if Hamilton doesn't finish and Rosberg doesn't finish, okay, Rosberg's champion. But if he could break Rosberg's car and he might luckily get away with it, say he broke the front end or smashed his front suspension, there are definitely other drivers who would have done a thing like that and then argued the case. And then argued the case afterwards. So this is where I think there's a bit of a line. Hamilton would absolutely push things to the limit, but it's very, very different from the Senna deliberate crash. Or a Schumacher. I'm not just kind of beating up on Senna. We're using that because he's Brazilian and we're talking about Brazil. But Schumacher,
it's like Schumacher parking it at La Grascas.
Schumacher parking it is naughty, against the rules actually, so that's probably one step too far. But Schumacher crashing into Damon Hill in 1994, or Schumacher crashing into Jacques Villeneuve in 1997, they are the deliberate fouls that I'm talking about that I don't think Hamilton would stoop to. But that's what
absolutely not.
It's what we were worried about Verstappen stooping to last year at Abu Dhabi. I think Mercedes were worried about that happening if there was an opportunity for it.
Well, he tried it multiple times in the year, didn't he?
So, I doubt we've got many Max Verstappen fans listening, like you said. So, since we're now talking about Max again, let's move back on to one of the Max-related
our favourite driver
topics. We can appreciate Max's skill and talent, I think, while still criticising him.
As a absolute outright talent of speed, he's one of the best. Probably, maybe one of the best there's ever been. I'm never, ever denying his talent. Unfortunately, he drives for a team that I can't stand, mostly because his two main bosses are not nice people. And I only say not nice people because I can't say worse words because it's on Brad's YouTube channel. So otherwise, I'd say other things. But I don't mind Max. You watch him in videos and video packages and stuff. You see him on some of the YouTube stuff he does when he races sim racing. He seems like a nice enough young lad, but he's a ruthless F1 driver who drives for a team that is a bit of a bully.
So we can agree to disagree on whether we think people are nice lads potentially. Let's have a look at whether or not we think I forget, Alex, that you can't see the little icon I put up. Whether we think Red Bull are receiving special treatment from Sky Sports F1 because they're having a visit this week, or maybe the chat again can educate us. Maybe they've already had a visit paid by, I think I read, the boss of Sky Sports to apologise or have discussions about how Red Bull would like to be portrayed in Sky broadcast in future. Have other teams had that courtesy extended to them? Do we
this story annoys me so much so I couldn't bring myself to read the whole thing because it just made me angry. As we discussed last week, nothing Ted said wasn't a fact, and the fact that it looks like Sky going over to Red Bull to go kiss the ring kind of upsets me because it's a case of they're basically saying they've done wrong when I really don't think they have. And yet again, Red Bull are just throwing their toys out the pram for stuff that wasn't not true. It wasn't inflammatory. Is that the right word? There was a whole discussion about inflammatory versus deflammatory.
Defamatory or inflammatory, take your pick. But Christian Horner chose both.
Well, as one of our friends always says, if you're gonna get it wrong every time, then you're wrong. But yeah, I'm angry about this because Sky shouldn't have to apologise, and especially to go there and send the boss. And it makes me worry for what they're going to do for Ted because Ted's brilliant at what he does, and I really, really enjoy everything Ted does on telly. And I hope it's not something that eventually costs Ted his job. But he did have Martin Brundle come and back him up, and Martin Brundle carries a lot of clout. So
as we probably could have predicted, the mere mention of Abu Dhabi 21 has sparked some heated discussions in the YouTube chat. So there are obviously people who have varying views in the chat, but that isn't what we're talking about right now. My views on this whole Red Bull Sky meetup is we don't know what it was about. We don't know what they're saying. It's just a bit weird that one team in particular seems to not only have their I don't know what's Horner's position. Team principal. It's team principal, isn't it? They don't only seem to have their team principal on every broadcast, like wall to wall coverage, to the point where people, it's a joke that it's so often. But they also then get the cold shoulder because of comments by one of the Sky team, who I think probably on lots of occasions is super complimentary. I think Ted is critical about people who he thinks deserves criticism, and I think the situation deserved criticism. And I don't think he was being particularly harsh about Max. He was given this kind of hypothetical, kind of alternative reality scenario. I think that's what they got all het up about. I think there might have been some kind of... I know Max Verstappen speaks extremely good English, but I think there might have been some kind of translation difference of understanding. I don't think Max quite understood the context of the discussion. But anyway, felt disrespected, whatever. But people feel disrespected. I don't think that then necessitates the boss of the TV broadcast company going to have a special meeting to either grovel and apologise or come up with a way that they agree that they can talk about a particular team going forward, when it seems to probably a lot of us listening to this show that Red Bull get pretty decent treatment and respect all the time anyway, if not more than other teams.
We don't see anybody on the telly more than Christian Horner. Either be it in practice sessions, on the pit wall, in post race. He's the person you see on telly all the time. He owes a lot to Sky, to be honest, for putting him on the pedestal that they kind of do. But Red Bull are very much hell-bent on being the victim here, yet they're the ones that broke the rules. So they've brought this controversy on themselves by breaking the cost cap and having a not legal car, and as we discussed last week, getting away with it basically with a slap on the wrist.
So I'm going to have to pull you up on that. How is their car not legal?
As in, it was a car that has had too much.
Yeah, so you're referring to
not illegal, as in flexi wings and that kind of stuff.
Yeah, not illegal technically. You're saying that because they spent too much money by default, that makes it an illegal. Okay, understood. So we will delve into our next Red Bull / Max related topic. Don't say we don't chat about Red Bull and Max on this show, because we.
So we have to talk about.
I don't think anyone was saying that. So, speaking of the budget cap, Helmut Marko again. Then I promise this is the last time we're going to talk about him today. Helmut says he believes 6 teams are over the 2022 budget cap. Now,
how does he know that?
Well, exactly my point. We heard quite a lot of pushback from Red Bull about when other teams were not directly accusing them, I guess, but they were kind of intimating, is that a word, that Red Bull have breached the cost cap, and that's not fair. How did they know about it? How has there been a leak? How on earth would Toto Wolff know about Red Bull's spending? Yet Helmut Marko seems to know about 6 teams spending. So what do we think? Is this just...
Well, 2 of them are his.
Well, that is true. So how does he know about the other 4 teams? And is this entirely hot air? Are they just kicking off because they're about to be, well, not about to, but in a few months to be found to have breached it again, and they just want to, point the focus at other people? Or do you think he really does have some insight about other teams?
I wouldn't be surprised if he's trying to make some noise about it, because they've gone, oh crap, we're going to be over this year as well. But what's the penalty? Another 7 million quid, another 10% off their wind tunnel time when their car might be light years ahead again. Why not? So this is the whole thing. Why not break the? There is no nothing to disincentivise. That one. I was never good at speaking words. To stop teams from doing it again. So I would love to know where he's got the information from. I'd love to just pick at his brain and go, right, where did you get this? Or is it complete and utter fabrication and fantasy? And he had to say more than 2 teams, because then everyone would just say it's both of his.
Edward Triolo in the YouTube chat asks, is Helmut a source of credible information? I don't know. I think maybe sometimes. I think he's a little bit like Bernie used to be, where he just likes to chuck grenades and see how the media responds.
Eddie Jordan.
I was watching today one of those police interceptor motorway cops TV show things, and this reminds me the whole cost cap situation with Red Bull and their punishment. Punishment. I was making inverted comma signs for the Twitter listeners. It reminded me of that. So there was a person on there who had been driving. He'd been pulled over by the police. He was driving without insurance. He didn't have a driving license. He tested positive for 2 different drugs, and he had an accident, damaged some property, and he lied to the police. And his punishment was he lost his driving license, which he didn't have in the first place, was banned from driving. Well, he already wasn't allowed to drive, so that made no difference to him. And he was fined £500, which for a person his age would have been way cheaper than just actually paying for the insurance on that car. So basically, he was given all the incentives to carry on doing exactly what he was doing because he wasn't allowed to drive anyway, and if he paid for insurance, it would have cost him more than the fine. So basically, I'm trying to tie a bit of a parallel there to Red Bull's punishment, because as Alex was pointing out there's not a lot of disincentive not to just do it again, and I think they probably have, and maybe other teams have as well, although they would have committed to that spend before they found out Red Bull's punishment or non-punishment. We can probably debate that. We spoke about it a couple of weeks ago. But yeah, it's nice when you see things in day-to-day life that remind you of Formula One regulations and punishments.
But it's such a weird situation, and you know, I've been an F1 fan. You know, I'm nearly 39 years old, and I've been an F1 since 19. That's what I remember watching. But my dad has always been an F1 fan, so you know, F1 has been in my life my entire life, and I've always felt great about the sport. And for nothing to do with the on-track stuff, only because of all the stuff going on off the track, has really made me question my fandom sometimes of the sport. You know, the problem is I'll never stop watching it because I love to watch a race and I love to watch the fastest cars in the world go toe to toe. But I'm getting really bored of all the politics. And, you know, we talk about it on here. Me and you talk most of the time about F1, and we talk about the politics all the time. We've got a lot of friends who are in F1, and all we do is talk about the politics all the time. And because there's nothing else really going on at the moment, the championships are all wrapped up, and we're all fully focused on 2023. And I just want to focus on the racing again.
So there's always been politics in Formula One ever since I've watched.
Not this bad, though.
But I think the big difference now is we're subjected to every element of it, whereas in the past, you wouldn't know anything about what was going on until you got the next issue of Autosport, if it had any kind of updates, which would be another week, and you'd have to then read it and sit down and digest it. It wasn't. Yeah.
Reads anything.
I used to read all the Autosports, or you'd hear about something on the much more limited TV coverage in 2 or 3 or 4 weeks' time. So it wasn't this constant bombardment where we get to give our opinion and hear everyone else's opinion all the way through the week. I mean, look at what we're doing now. We didn't have a show. There was nothing like this when we were in our formative Formula One watching years. So I think maybe, although we have had a kind of nice period building up to the last couple of years, I don't think there was anything particularly super controversial or what's the word where 2 different teams of people are at each other's throats. Come on, US politics people. Partisan. I don't think it was quite as partisan, and I don't like to use the word toxic, but I think we had a nice period and now it's a lot worse. But I do feel like these same situations with, you know, teams bending rules and people getting annoyed by it, that has always happened. There just weren't as many people seeing it and talking about it. So maybe we'll just get used to this level, especially with the newfound, you know, the new popularity of Formula One. There's just so many more eyeballs on every single situation. But at least we have outlets like this where we can vent and, talk to our echo chamber. And
is it better to sit here and vent and know everything, or sit in a pool of ignorant bliss?
I did used to like autosports. I used to have like
Doesn't
a
surprise
box.
me at all.
I had a box. I had like every issue. So, and I used to keep them because it was, I don't know why.
You're a
Why
geek.
did I used to keep them? I had like a washing basket, like a big plastic off of Amazon washing basket in the garage.
There wasn't Amazon back then.
No, but nowadays you buy it on Amazon. and these autosports were so heavy. I had so many that after I somehow managed to get them up in the loft of the garage, I couldn't safely get them back down again because it was going to kill someone if I dropped it. Anyway, what I'm trying to say is I used to
Everyone
really
used to
love
keep those
Autosport.
kind of magazines, and I never quite understood why. I'm pretty certain that I think I used to keep Max Power, or my brother used to keep HMV, not HMV.
HMV, you mean FHM?
FHM, that one.
You're dating.
I'm dyslexic. But yeah, so everyone used to keep them, and I never understood why.
Yeah, I don't know.
Always-
because we just didn't
always
have,
baffled me.
we didn't have as much media. We didn't have as much stuff. So, you got bored, you go back and read an old, well, I would go read an old Autosport or get the posters out in the middle. I remember, right, so this is just one of these tangents, but I was a big Damon Hill fan. And when Damon Hill moved to Arrows after he was spurned by Williams after his championship winning year, he was in this really cool, this is for anyone who doesn't know, very slow but very cool Zepter sponsored Arrows,
blue and white one.
Danker. It had Danker as well. I don't even know what these.
Danker.
Was that a bank? Danker? I don't know, but it was like a blue white with some accents of red arrows. And I loved Damon. I thought he was awesome.
He wasn't a bad car, that either.
It nearly won.
He nearly won Hungary, didn't he?
Yeah, should have won Hungary.
Should have Hungary. Car started to break.
He was robbed, absolutely.
And Villeneuve overtook him on the grass.
Yeah, so there we go. Damon pushed him wide as he could, but didn't deliberately hit him. Anyway, the reason I'm talking about this Arrows is because I remember in the centre fold of Autosports, the centre 2 pages, you used to sometimes get posters that teams would pay to have. And I had the Arrows, double page spread, pull out poster of Damon Hill. It was next to my bed. I used to love that. Anyway, right, we're massively off on a tangent. We've gone through all of our topics that we...
And you didn't think we'd have enough to talk about for an hour.
Well, we haven't quite made it to an hour. We've got 5 minutes. Have you got any other Formula One? Well, normally we go to our chat, but the chat have been just kind of, chatting along with us. They've not really been suggesting...
They haven't been chatting along with us. They have been arguing about Lewis Hamilton and Max Verstappen, and there's been talk about Silverstone.
So,
do we want to talk about Silverstone?
I can give my opinion again. That'll take less than 5 minutes. Okay, Max Verstappen. I watched this just yesterday because obviously you see this video. I didn't go looking for it. Obviously, I don't like trauma, but I saw it pop up on Twitter or something, and it was an onboard from Lewis. It must have been like a
TikTok. It was TikTok.
I think it was like one of those quick recaps. I don't know. It might have been like a compilation of lots of things that happened to Hamilton in the last year. Whatever. Anyway, and it was on board with Hamilton, and he dives down the inside, and then Verstappen appears from nowhere and just drives clean across the front of him. At the time I called it like this. Every time I've watched it since, whether it's slow-mo, full speed, outside angle, onboard angles, every time I see that crash, if you painted both of those cars white and didn't tell me who was who, if it was a completely unbiased situation and I couldn't tell which car was which, I would tell you, wow, the outside car just turned straight across the inside car like they wanted an accident. And everyone says it was desperate from Hamilton. I think it was careless and reckless from the outside car. We don't even need to refer to who was who. It really was, there's a car up your inside, and you just turn across on them like they're not there. And all the kind of obfuscation and deflection of saying that it means to try to confuse people or muddy the waters. For all of that, all the stuff about that Hamilton understeered, I didn't make the apex, all these absolutely terrible arguments that would not hold water. Somehow the stewards used these, well, we know how, because Red Bull fed them those lines, same as at Abu Dhabi, they fed them any doesn't mean all, and the stewards were just like, okay, yeah, whatever Red Bull says. But that was just non-arguments. First of all, you're allowed to understeer. Second, it was very minor. Third, doesn't matter where the apex. You don't have to make an apex for it to be legal.
That seems to be the biggest argument. The biggest argument always seems to be, well, you didn't make the apex. So the apex is only the only reason for an apex, and the reason we call it the apex, is it's the point you hit.
I can't
when
believe we're
you're
getting
trying
into
to
this.
go around. I know it's the point you hit. Well, you wanted to get an extra 5 minutes on. It's the point you hit to get the fastest line through the corner. That's the whole point of the apex. The apex isn't an official part of the circuit that drivers must hit, because otherwise everyone will get a penalty for missing apexes.
The number of people,
apex.
the number of people that heard, who was it that said that on Sky Sports? Someone, must have been Button or Chandok or someone, mentioned, oh well, Lewis didn't hit the apex, and absolutely made
everyone took off with it.
50% of the F1 fandom think that was actually a rule, or something which made an overtake legitimate, or something you had to do in order for an overtake to be, or for an accident to be deemed not your fault. And the biggest, most stupid thing about that whole argument is Max hit Hamilton way before they reached the apex. Even if it was relevant, Hamilton wasn't allowed to even attempt to get to the apex because his car was crashed into from a car sweeping towards the apex from the outside well before they got there. So anyway.
And the thing is, the main reason people are so up in arms about it is because Max did have a very big impact with the 51G, blah, blah, blah. And yeah, it was a big hit. It was a big shunt, but he got out. He got out unaided and walked away. And because of the impact size, it was the precautions that they have to take. They sent him to hospital.
And this is actually a point. This is a point that I don't think we've really spoken about too much, which is if that exact situation happened, but Verstappen just spins around onto the tarmac area, his car's out of the race, suspension's broken, but he doesn't ever make it to the wall. We don't have remotely the same reaction because Red Bull Horner in particular wouldn't have had this drama, this potential injury, the hospitalization, the number of G,
the celebration,
wouldn't have had all that to point to try and make out that Hamilton had done it on purpose, had put him in the wall. Those were the words we heard over and over, as if a driver who is just going for a move, just diving down the inside of someone in an overtaking zone, as if they know how that's going to play out, as if they know what the other driver is exactly going to do, and that they're deliberately, the way Horner was talking about it, you would have thought that Hamilton had come up from up behind Verstappen and smashed into the back of him and fired him straight on into the wall, or looked across at him Schumacher style at Jerez 97 and turned the wheel towards him. That was the kind of thing that was being made out to us. We were being massively gaslit by Horner that whole time. It was infuriating actually, because it was at worst a racing incident. At best, from my side, it was Verstappen causing an accident which was self-policing. So anyway,
and the thing is, with that corner, there is plenty of room for two cars to go through. We see it every single year. Two cars go through that corner, and then Christian Horner, that guy again, had the audacity to say you can't put two cars through there. It was a stupid thing to do. Blah 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 blah. Yet he did it. Lewis did it later on in the race against Lando and against Charles.
Yeah, but they'll tell you he gave him more room and all that kind of thing. So
he did it this year. Yeah, he gave him more room to make sure he made around the corner. The thing is, what it has given me is a joke every single time I'm on iRacing at Silverstone, and I take somebody up the inside of Silverstone and go, "Oh look, I can do it."
And I like how it made the if we didn't have enough drama at the end of the championship, I like how it made Max's overtake for the championship an illegal move, because he was nowhere near the apex when he passed Hamilton for the title on the last lap. So there we go.
That's a good point.
And we were told that was illegal. So anyway, I'm interested to see our viewer numbers when I look back at this and see whether we had a sharp drop when we started talking about these subjects. Which
no, it stayed up. I'll tell you what, we had a conversation. We had a conversation before this show about whether we were going to do the Twitter space or not, and we've had 57 people in. And I told you, as long as it stays above 50, we're all. So I told you the Twitter space is good.
Yeah, so I'm wary of us running this. Let's be honest, rubbish Twitter space where we're not really interacting properly with the Twitter listeners, because we're focusing mainly on YouTube, and it's pretty impossible to do this without some fancy audio visual equipment hooking our phones up, because obviously, as you probably know, Twitter Spaces, unless it's changed since I last checked, they can only be done on mobile devices. Obviously, we're recording the YouTube broadcast through OBS on my PC, so it's difficult to kind of join them together. So because it's mainly audio, there's not a lot of visual stuff going on. If we can incorporate both and people are listening, then great. But I was a bit wary of it being too rubbish on Twitter. So sorry if we do neglect you a bit, Twitter people. But if you want the full experience, as we said loads of times before, come and chat with all the other people chatting and arguing and actually generally being really nice to each other. I don't think there was any particular horrible flames, even when we were in the heat of the Silverstone discussion. I think people all kind of agreed to disagree. I have had a question about the BIKC, so let's just cover that before we go. Last week, or this weekend just gone, I competed in a kart championship called the British Indoor Kart Championship. It was essentially the culmination of a months-long competition that's been running for 4 or 5 months with local finals and then regional finals, and then this was the big national final, and I was fortunate enough to make it all the way through to that. And someone has asked, what did I think about it? I'm wary of telling them too many things that they could do better because it is in part a bit of a rival to my own championship that I run called the British Rental Kart Championship, which happens in January. But essentially, it was good fun. The people that I met were really good. The karts were not brilliantly equivalent. Lots of performance differences between the karts. That is quite often the case in rental karting. It's just a shame that they normally buy new karts for the grand final. They didn't this year. But the competition was great. And the live coverage, the broadcast was good, and I think a lot of people who did that event will be racing in our event as well. And congratulations to the champions, Dante Dillon and Johnny Elliott in the lightweights and the heavyweights.
Two of our friends.
And Mackenzie Jones, who was the middleweight champion, who isn't a BRKC driver. Anyway, there we go. Most people listening to this won't care anything about go-kart racing, but I thought I'd just mention that.
But it's got us over the hour. We got an hour of incoherent chat about F1 when there's been hardly any decent news this week. So we do thank you for listening.
So last week I said we wouldn't be back this week on YouTube because I'd be in France. Due to some logistical issues in getting tyres from Serbia to a test track in France, I didn't end up going to France this week, but I am going next week. So there will still be 2 weeks where I'm away, and this will only be a Twitter space, and we'll probably interact with the people on Twitter way better than we currently are. So
I think maybe we'll actually take some speakers.
Exactly, that's what we will definitely do. Yeah, we'll definitely do that. I'll be in my hotel room. Alex will be at his house. So next Wednesday, 10 p.m. UK time, we will convene on Twitter, and on YouTube, guys, we'll see you in 3 weeks' time. Everyone enjoy the Brazilian Grand Prix. Thank you, Alex, for rushing back from football.
Thank you very much. And don't forget to like the YouTube, subscribe to Brad's YouTube channel, find my YouTube channel, subscribe to that, and follow us both on Twitter.
Thank you very much. Perfect ending, Alex. See you guys next week.
Bye.